In this episode, I talk with Venessa Rodriguez about how her mom's cancer inspired her devotion to food as medicine. We talk about ancestral nutrition and feeding your wild with some unique approaches to figuring out what to eat in today's crazy food world and how to get healthier. Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to this week's episode of the Flower Lounge. Today I have with us Venessa Rodriguez, who is a functional nutritionist, intuitive nourishment guide, and host of the Feed Your Wild podcast. Her mission is to support wild-hearted change makers to get to the root cause of their challenges with their health, body, and soul path, and awaken their innate healing capacity by reconnecting them to nature and their own medicine through food, spirit, and love. She combines science and spirituality of food using a functional approach, intuitive guidance with Akashic records, and ancestral nutrition. And Venessa guides her clients through transformative experiences, not only with their own health and life, but also sharing their gifts with the world. So we're really excited to have Venessa with us. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
So you close your eyes and go back to a time in your childhood when you played around flowers or plants or trees. And we might have done this on your podcast. And you just think about what you were doing and who you were with and what you were up to. See if you could find a favorite flower or botanical, and then reflect on the 3 words that you would use to describe its personality. And then whenever you're ready, you can just share everything you were thinking of.
So when you said childhood and backyard, right away I imagined my mom loved gardening, and I remember going out there all the time when she was doing that. And one of the flowers that I was drawn to and I had never seen before was snapdragon.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not stop playing with snapdragon. It was like, where you're just like pushing on those joint spots and it's like opening the mouth and you make it talk. And so it would be snapdragon. And you mentioned the three aspects or personalities of the snapdragon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, play is like the first one that comes to mind because that's what I wanted to do right away. Also, there was a little bit of, I don't know how to describe it, but it was like the snapdragons that were there stood out, like they stood out from the rest of the flowers, and it was like independent, I guess is kind of the essence of it. Mm-hmm. There was an independence there.
Sure.
So playfulness, independence, and spunk, which might go with the playfulness, but there's a little bit of spunkiness too.
So great, because what we find is that the way you describe your childhood flower would describe the way that you bring your greatest gifts into this world. So play, standing out from the rest, independent, and spunk. Does that sound like you?
I love it. Well, I'm going to explore that more. So much fun.
Yeah, so let's just dive right in. I know that you love talking about food as medicine, and I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about functional nutrition and what is that? We hear a lot about functional medicine. It's kind of like buzzwords these days, right? What's functional nutrition?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it, luckily, because I love functional medicine and nutrition, it is growing. And a lot of people are asking me about it, so I'm so happy just to share. Functional nutrition is really the intersection between functional medicine and nutritional coaching. So functional medicine is what could be seen as a root cause resolution practice. It takes principles from ancient medical traditions like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, which really look at the body as a whole and interconnected with its environment and nature and the world, as well as a spiritual being, rather than just kind of getting really myopic with individual body systems where things are siloed, like we're siloed off of nature, each organ system is siloed. That's kind of the way that it's seen in conventional realms. And so functional medicine really kind of uses that approach that is very ancient and then combines it with modern tools and research. So looking at lab panels, deficiencies, and then all of the new scientific research that's coming out, right? So like on the microbiome or epigenetics. And so taking all of this information and then really using it in a person-centered model rather than like a disease-centered management approach, which is what many conventional circles do. And I know I have experienced it personally in my own health. My whole journey that started my fascination, obsession with health and nutrition was really through my mom's journey with cancer. And that approach was really cancer in general. Like the conventional cancer approach is very disease-centered management approach. And it's kind of like you're going down this checklist that you just have to check each box, right?
Not only that, but it's so, I find I haven't had as much personal experience with it as you have in the Western system, but it seems to me to be so, like philosophically, it's almost like something's attacking the body or something's working against me or something that's very fearful is happening that's just like gotten out of control, when in fact the body is always working to find balance and in its innate wisdom knows exactly where to like pack things in little tumors so they're not creating havoc in the rest of our body, right? And
absolutely,
just like looking at like how can we work with the body instead of just like going to a barrage of external chemicals that are going to possibly get at the root cause but also possibly create a lot of damage in the process of that. What is there anything you want to share from your personal experience with your mom about what you learned or what inspired you?
Oh man, there's so much. But I feel like to connect it to what you just mentioned, really looking at the difference between slapping a Band-Aid on a symptom versus really looking and digging for the root issues, and that the root issues, those can be multi-layered and in different areas of our life. So for example, with my mom and her cancer journey, we really went through the conventional approach the first several years. And throughout that process, I was doing research. There wasn't as much. This was like, this was like late 2000s, so maybe like 2006, 7. She was diagnosed in 2005 or 4. So at that time, there wasn't as much information on the internet as there is now. Yeah. It took a little bit more digging, so I found myself in these really obscure chat rooms and forums to find information like on alternative healing approaches for cancer. And that's where I was like, whoa, food matters? Like our doctors weren't saying that. And when I would bring it up to her oncologist, there was sort of like a denial, or just kind of like, well, that's not really the important piece we need to look at here. We're dealing with cancer here. And so it was just so that was really my awakening throughout the 6 years that she journeyed with cancer. It was also experimenting with my own body, as finally after she went through all of the check boxes that they had for her, and they told her, look, there's nothing else we have for you. Like, you did all the conventional treatments and experimental treatments and this and that we have available. We don't have any other answers for you. So it's time to take a vacation because you're probably going to die. And so, they gave her a date, and that's when my parents were finally open, because they had no other choice. So they were open to these alternative approaches that my sister and I were really digging more into. So
wow.
Yeah, it was like a PhD and, going into the alternative realms from this conventional model. And as we incorporated it for my mom, my family, my whole family really kind of joined in as a unit in changing our own approach to nutrition and food and supplements. And my entire life changed because of it.
Wow. It's funny how you were saying about your conversation with the doctors, and they were like, like, step aside food. What we're really here to talk about is cancer. But you think about, like, just common sense, like, what is an experience that every single one of us on the planet has had? Like, we've all had, say, like, a really bad cold. And that when you have a really bad cold, like, every little thing you eat matters. Like, you might have a little bit of orange juice and you're like, oh God, that was like too sweet, too sour, too much, body can't handle it. You might have like a little bit of broth and you're like, oh yeah, that's good. You might have some ginger tea and your body's like, oh yeah, that's good. And then you have something sweet and you're like, oh God, no, that's not the right thing for me right now. Or dairy or whatever. Like, you become super hypersensitive. And in those moments, that every single thing you put in your mouth is affecting you. But then, so when you don't have a cold, you might not have that kind of sensitivity, but it doesn't mean that it's not also like the most important thing. And like the first place you could start to immediately make shifts, because we do it 3 or more times a day, right? I mean, it's just like, it just seems so funny to me that the most obvious answer is like sitting right under our nose. And that could be like the first place people start.
Yeah. And I really thought a lot about this over the years, especially at that point where I was like, why didn't anybody teach this to me? And my grandmothers carried that wisdom, right? They had their herb garden and they treated us with remedies that were passed down, but we were programmed to see this new science and disconnected from nature, disconnected from intuition, disconnected from spirit. And in that way, it becomes empty, And so I really also feel hope, though, because I see now in more conventional circles an opening, like a receiving that food does matter. Like, now there's kind of no denying it because now it's in the science. And it's almost like we're coming full circle, where we're coming back to this ancient wisdom and knowledge we had, but trying to relearn it in a different way in the times that we're living
in. And so what, so like, what happened with your mom? Did, like, you went through all the new approaches and what happened?
Yeah, so it was really fascinating because at that point we had found this center in Arizona. I don't know if it's still existing, but it was called Oasis of Healing. And it was basically an integrative cancer center that incorporated food, nutrition, and various therapies like sauna, colon hydrotherapy. There is, just like kind of imagining some holistic spa. That's really what it was. And it was in Mesa, Arizona. You guys are in Arizona, right?
Yeah, I was going to say where, because we're in Phoenix. Mesa. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe check it out. I don't know if it's still there, but we went there, and that was really like deep dive right away, because they have you do a cleanse. At the time, they were more focused on like a raw vegan cleanse approach with lots of juicing and
Sure.
and things like that. So what was fascinating is that, and also it's Arizona, it's not Chicago, like in the middle of winter, right? So what I'm learning now too, when we're looking at our genes and our predispositions, like my mom really needed, my whole family's from Puerto Rico. She really needed more sun. She knew that for years intuitively. She needed more sun. And the healing aspects of sun beyond just vitamin D, right? But so here she was getting all of it. She was getting the sun, she was getting the community, she was getting all of these healing foods and therapies. And they would track her cancer markers in various ways, and they were going down. And here, the conventional doctors had told us there was nothing else she was going to do. She was going to die. And when she was doing these approaches, they were going down. And so it was like, I wanted to scream, to the rooftop, you guys, like, tell the world about the amazingness, the power of healing that our bodies have when you're just able to give it what it needs.
Right.
And so unfortunately, most of those treatments are not covered by insurance, and we ran out of money. And so we had to come back to Chicago, and it was, at the time, it was incredibly difficult to find things like that in Chicago and to rebuild that same kind of environment. And just through a whole bunch, my mom was already very, very late stage. Her immune system was very suppressed, and complications started happening, and eventually went downhill. And my mom ended up passing away in 2010. Yeah.
Oh.
So that was, I always get emotional.
Of course.
That was really that was the catalyst for me. That was like seeing in real life how our environment matters, how food matters, how making amends with our body matters, and all of these things. Also spiritually, like towards the end, my mom was starting to open up to some of the things that she was missing at that energetic and spiritual level. And it was like seeing all of this happen before my eyes, and then coming back to Chicago and all of that shutting down again, that there was this moment on the car ride back. She passed away in the hospital, and on the car ride back home, it was like the most surreal, longest ride ever. It's like, even now, it's just like so bizarre. It was like a different dimension, like driving back home. And
from Arizona?
We were in Chicago at that point. So it was driving back from the hospital. Mm-hmm. And it was really early morning. And I remember my dad was driving and I was in the front seat, and it was like I wasn't seeing anything in the world as we were driving through the city. And I went to some other place, and I felt this deep, it was like an awakening and an invitation at the same time. It was almost like my higher self or something was like calling me and saying, this is my path now, I to not only bring holistic health and what that truly means to me in my life and to those that I love, but to also teach others and help assist others in their life so they don't have to suffer the same fate. I really saw how I was the picture of my mom. We are very similar genetically, body-wise. We had many of the same health challenges: asthma, acne when we were younger, chronic acid reflux, IBS. All of these issues. And all of them went away when I changed my diet, and when I I started nourishing my body. All of that went away. And I saw how we have the power to shift this lineage of chronic dis-ease. We don't have to perpetuate that. And now with the work that I do, incorporating Akashic Records, incorporating the spiritual aspects, I see how that works on that level too. So it was really that ride home that I was like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm doing.
Wow, that's so powerful. That is a powerful catalyst into what you do in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember earlier you used the word epigenetics, and I'm fascinated by epigenetics. But if there are any listeners who have never heard that term before, do you want to explain?
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. So epi at its root stands for above or beyond. And so when we're thinking about epigenetics, it's really above or beyond the genetic blueprint that we have. So we're all born with, if we're thinking about even in terms of architecture, we have this blueprint to build this house. And then there's the building of it, and then there's the main maintenance of it, and then there's add-ons, and there's like all this other stuff that maybe the original blueprint didn't necessarily have, but it's all of these levels of potentiality that can occur. And what activates certain genes and turns them on or off, if we want to speak a little bit more simplistically about it in that way, it's what happens in the connection and relationship with our environment and ourselves. So the environment that you're living in, the food that you're eating, the air that you're breathing, the pharmaceuticals or the supplements that you're taking into your body, your relationships with loved ones or with yourself. All of those have an impact on our genes and can activate certain things or turn off certain things. So, for example, a big topic now is methylation, and thinking about if you have a genetic predisposition for not the MTHFR gene is kind of a hot button in functional medicine. So some people think.
Tell me more about that.
Sure. So MTHFR is essentially a pathway or a gene. I mean, there's different ways to look at it, where we metabolize and utilize folate. When you have an MTHFR gene SNP, which is a single nucleotide polymorphism, it's basically just like a little mutation, but it's there
10 times fast.
Yeah, right. You shorten it to SNP, SNP. Okay. If you have a genetic SNP with that gene, then it can reduce your ability to metabolize and utilize folate, basically to methylate. And methylation is really important in so many different body systems in the body. I mean, detoxification, aging, like all this stuff. So, but
and having babies, right? Isn't that
having babies,
the most
totally. Yes. Fertility, so many aspects. And so a lot of people think, oh no, I have this genetic SNP and it reduces my ability to methylate by 60% or whatever. Sure. But what's really important is looking at the epigenetic factors here. Just because you're born with it doesn't mean that it's activated. And we could do so much with food and with lifestyle to modulate that so that we make sure we're getting what we need. So, and that goes for everything, for all of our genes. There's so much that we can do, and it could get really, really, people like to make things super complicated. I'm right there with them, right? Like I go into something and we like to just make it super confusing and complicated. But if we're to really distill it and make it as simple as possible, it's coming back to food as medicine, intuitive eating, and what I call feeding your wild, like learning what it is that your body needs as nourishment, and then actually listening to it, like doing it, because sometimes we know what we need, but then we don't, pull the trigger.
Yeah. Oh, I really need to drink water. Oh, I really need to drink tea. Oh, I really need to, and like 5 hours go by and we still haven't gotten up to get water because we're working so hard on XYZ. I just wanted to come back to something that you said that I absolutely loved, and I've never heard it described that way, when you were talking about epigenetics and the blueprints and the maintenance and the add-ons, because that I think really is like a big duh. Like it totally simplifies it to a level that it just really makes it make sense. Like if you own a house, right? Let's say you own a house that's built in a certain year and you live right next door to someone else who has a similar layout house built in the same time, the same year, with the same builders. You have somebody that practices regular maintenance. They fix things up. They, add on extra rooms. They repaint every now and then. And then the other house just like kind of goes to hell in a handbasket. Well, it's the same house, but right. It's like, it's like, well, but of course we wouldn't just say, oh, I could buy a house just based on its building plans. Of course you wouldn't make that decision. You'd want to see how somebody had taken care of it. Or you can think of it in terms of the car you drive, or any of those things. Like, those people who don't change their oil and the people who change their oil in their car, right? So it's like, epigenetics just makes so much sense. It's all about how well we're taking care of our bodies and minds.
And then what I love too is taking that example and then throwing in the fact that our body is an intelligent supraorganism. So it has the capacity to self-maintain and self-heal if you bring the elements in, versus a car and a house, it can't, right? It can't like repair itself. So all we really need to do is get really in tune with what our body, our mind, our spirit, our soul is telling us we need, and then remove the blocks.
Right. So what do you recommend, what is a method that you use for intuitive nourishment? Because I'm thinking you can practice it on your own, and then when you get really good at it, you can even use it with your pets and your kids. Because I know with my elderly dog at home, I can kind of tune in and like, what is it she actually needs? Totally. And figure out different foods or herbs that will help give her a little boost. So what is a good method that you recommend to folks? Because, right, you as well as I know that it's just more complicated as time goes on. Like, oh my gosh, now I can't have dairy. Now I can't have wheat. Now this thing is bugging me. Oh, that thing is bugging me. Oh, and I have a sensitivity to that. So what do you recommend to people in terms of intuitive eating or nutrition?
Yeah, so the place that I always start, and this is also a practice that is very common in functional medicine circles as well, in terms of diet specifically, is clearing the clutter. It's almost like you can't fully know if you have too much noise or distraction. It's really hard to listen to yourself, your body, to listen to the cues of your environment if there's a bunch of static. So the first thing that needs to happen is to remove what you know to be static. And that means also getting really honest with ourselves. One of the biggest things that I find with particularly the people that I work with, they're usually very, very intuitive, sensitive, creative, busy. And so one of the most common challenges they have is, I don't have time for that, or this and that. And they fill their time, space, calendar with stuff to do, constant. Like there's no space, because they believe like the spaciousness is void. It means there's a lack. It means, I'm not doing enough, when it's actually the opposite. It's actually, oh no, you are creating this spaciousness for potentiality, for awareness, for listening, for awakening, right? And so we can look at this at a very practical level, clearing the clutter in your kitchen, in your cabinets, like all the bullshit that is in there that is like, asking you to visit nightly or whatever it is. Just clearing the clutter at that level. Maybe it's something that's been weighing on you, like physical clutter in your closet. There's something energetically that is like, it's holding there. And so we need to clear that space. And so I have people do just sort of like an intuitive meditation where they're sitting, they're breathing, they're really imagining the spaciousness and then feeling what is in the way of that. And so some people will say, oh man, it's like, in my calendar, like I book myself too much and I'm too busy. Or it's, I am having too much alcohol, So I think it's just starting with one thing, and the very first thing that intuitively comes to you, even if it seems like it's not directly related to your health or food or whatever. If it's coming to you first and foremost intuitively, that means that that's what needs to be addressed. It's like the first layer, and just start there. I also feel like so many people want to do all the things at once. And then if they don't do it right, then like screw the whole thing, And I get it, because I was there for a very long time. But so I really invite people to carve out like an hour they could do it this week. Carve out an hour in your calendar, like schedule a meeting with yourself where you're going to go through this process. You just go, you create a really nice space for yourself. You tell people, I can't be bothered, treat it like a real meeting. And then journal on it, whatever way that you meditate or that you connect with yourself in that way, and ask yourself, what is the clutter I need to clear right now? And see what comes out, like don't even judge it, just allow it to come through, and then put it in your calendar that you're actually going to do something about it. What needs to be cleared? And what I have found is people who are able to do this and start to clear things, it's almost like there's a domino effect that happens energetically and things begin to fall into place. But what really needs to happen first is to clear whatever is in the way.
That is so interesting. That's very, very interesting. Just, you think, oh, functional nutrition coach, we're going to talk about diet. We're going to talk about what I'm eating. And it's a completely opposite approach. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I feel like so many of the factors that keep people stuck or unable to change their diet or to implement a lifestyle is because of these things that have seemingly nothing to do with nutrition, So it's like, set yourself up for success by doing these things. And then maybe it's the clearing the clutter in your food, like, doing some sort of reset. There's so many wonderful programs out there too that are free that you can do, that I know a lot of people have tried and then they can't stick with it.
It's almost like you're tackling tackling isn't the right word, like gently addressing whatever the sabotage factors are, right? Because if I have, stuff that's disorganized in my closet and I just keep wanting to get to it, but I never get to it, and I keep wanting to, there's a reason why I never make that a priority, right? And so if that's sabotaging me there, then where else is it sabotaging me? And it's going to sabotage me with food, right?
Yeah. That's where the juiciness is. That's the juicy stuff, That's like, okay, and you're so right, where it infiltrates every level. And it might not even be that we can cognitively understand it, but even at a very emotional or energetic or soul level, that it's infiltrating. And so when we can begin to like tease out that thread and then pull that thread, I feel like so many people are like, oh, I already knew this, but now I can experience the shift that happens when I fully commit to addressing it.
That's so interesting. Wow. I love your approach. I remember doing some work with a friend of mine on some childhood issues, and she had me do this exercise and go back to my inner child and ask the inner child what it needed. And my inner child actually needed to precisely like clear out the closet. And then I start wondering, like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I wonder if there's some kind of subconscious tie to like the amount of sweets, and I like don't eat a lot of white sugar at all, but like, chocolate or dark chocolate or little sweet things here and there, like if that's also tied in. I just feel like the whole like eating habitual patterns are so tied into so many different things in our subconscious that we may not even be aware of.
Absolutely. I mean, if we're going into the functional aspect of it, the gut is like a foundational area that we typically focus on. And what I have seen in terms of patterns working with people on their gut health, whether it's, with some kind of dysbiosis or imbalance with their microbiome, so like SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or even parasites, is that there are these fundamental energetic imbalances, or that like stick with us at our subconscious level and then manifest in our bodies in a very real physiological way. I know that to be true for myself. I struggled with that for a long time. I even had parasites at some point, and it made sense because when the time that I developed that and I had issues with it, I allowed myself to leak in those areas of empowerment where people, not that like I had parasitic people in my life, but I was the one who was allowing people to take more from me than what I had. And so it's interesting to look at these various issues that we might have on this surface physiological level, and then just get curious about what might the deeper meaning or pattern be around that. And when I ask clients, they intuitively know what it is.
They know. We know. We just don't know we know, right?
Yeah, or like we need approval of, or like just somebody to witness and say, yes, I see that, and you are right, because you know what you know.
And when you refer to ancestral nutrition, what were you talking about?
So there's so many different aspects of that too, but when the biggest piece of the ancestral nutrition is, well, number one, real food, and I think that most people understand that now. Like, what did your great grandmothers eat? What was available to them? Mm-hmm. Did it come in a package? Probably not. And so just looking at really basically what is real food and starting there. But then when we look at biologically where we come from and this blueprint that we carry forth, and what our ancestry is, that can sort of give us clues as well as to what diets or foods might be nourishing for us. So, and one aspect, if we're really looking at globally, Weston A. Price is a really good example of this, where he was a dentist that went around the world and was noting what all these different people with really robust health were eating. And they were all eating very different things because it depended on where they were in their environment and what was available and what was seasonal. And so these are these more ancestral and ancient approaches like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. Those are also rooted in the places where they came from, right? So Ayurveda deriving from like India and that area. So a lot of those foods are going to be really related there. So even when you're using Ayurveda, you want to think about bioregional Ayurveda. Like, where am I now? Where did I come from? What's my environment? What's available seasonally? And then using these approaches that can be related to Ayurveda. So it's really about looking at those ancestral principles, looking at your unique lineage and blueprint, and then where are you now in relationship with your environment, and then making decisions based off of all of that.
I love that, because I think, everybody's always kind of like looking for what's the right mix of things to eat, and it's an ongoing discovery. Like, the things that work for you this year might be different next year, might be different in 2020, right? So, or 2021. So, and like, I hear so many people just sort of like jumping on the bandwagon of like, okay, now I'm going to be vegan because, X, Y, or Z. And so what you're inviting people to do is to discover the kinds of foods that were nourishing along your genetic lines and lineage, which is where your body originally was made from.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know whether it's they weren't connected to their ancestors or they've been adopted or whatever the reason is. So in those cases, it's like start where you are, start with real food, start with seasonal and local. It doesn't have to get super complicated. And then you can, maybe do genetic testing if you want to. That's a very new realm, like the nutrigenomic factors. We don't know a ton about it, although it's growing every day, but it can be cool to dive in and see where you do come from. And that can help inform and fill in these sort of empty areas that you might not have information. But I would say start simple, start where you are.
And so what is starting simple? Like where your ancestral lineage comes from and what they typically ate?
Yeah, so let's say you do know. I'll use myself as an example. My family is originally from Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico's very mixed, right? And so there's ancestry from Europe, from Africa, and from natives that were there already. Yeah.
Taino.
The Taino, exactly. And so when I look at generations back, what was my family eating then? Because you're also cultivating relationship with with the same environment over generations, which informs the next generation. And that was primarily root vegetables, like vegetables in general, plantains. Oh my God,
Plátanos.
Plátanos, fish, seafood, and then also the tropical fruits. Now, what's interesting though is like, does it make sense to have a bunch of tropical fruit in Chicago in the middle of winter? No, like it's a totally different environment, but in the summertime, totally. And so just starting to play around with that. And I noticed for myself, I've literally tried every single diet because I also want to know what my clients are going through, if I'm going to recommend a particular diet or if they're coming to me about some diet. So, and I'm just like curious about that. So I have found for myself, what feels best is what looks like a Mediterranean diet, which is very similar to what is eaten on the island if you're looking at real food, right? So it's seafood primarily as like animal protein, and also lots of vegetables, some root vegetables, not necessarily being like keto, right? I know keto is really big right now, and I work with a memory center where we do use the ketogenic diet for Alzheimer's. So it's like not getting dogmatic about diets or about food, but playing around and coming to this, bringing the playfulness and the fun, that you had mentioned earlier, to food, and like play with your food literally in that way and see how it feels for you. But anyway, I felt like that was confirmation that, oh, that makes sense, because that's kind of how my family has eaten for generations. And I knew that. And one thing that I also know is I need more sun, and yeah. So, but which is another form of nourishment and nutrition. And, we can take all of the vitamin D supplementation, which sometimes we do need to help support us, to bring us to sufficiency, but really that's coming from the sun. So looking at the environmental aspects that we also have for generations in our lineage have received as nourishment that we might be lacking now.
Okay, let's go out on a limb, because I know you can. Okay, so then so in terms of your work with the Akashic Records, in terms of like for those people who believe in reincarnation, past life influences, and let's say we knew that you had several lifetimes in India, does it then make sense that chai is really comforting to you, or that particular herbs and spices work really well with your constitution because on some level they're comforting? Or how does all of that work, and does that play in, and can you use that as a source of at least play and fun and discovery and intrigue.
Totally. Oh, I love this question. I've never gotten this one before. So what's interesting with information that comes through the Akashic records for me when I'm working with someone is they are always bringing in information. When I say they, I mean, I just use that as like a general term because I don't really know who's giving me the information, whether it's, a guide, an ancestor. We can inquire like who that is, but so we just use sort of like they, right? When they give information, it's within the context and filter of this person's life and biology right now. So because the purpose is to live our lives in this embodiment, in this time space now. Yeah. And what is going to be best for us, what's going to help optimize that for us to be able to do that in this lifetime. So everything is filtered through like this lifetime, this body. And I get a lot of questions from people like, I have this experience and I want to know my past life. And there's also a lot of different theories about what are past lives. Like if we come outside, the Akashic records is sort of outside of the space-time continuum that we live in, like this linear timeline that we live in. So there is no past or future per se. The records are created with it's like co-creating your records through your embodiment right now, every moment. And so it could be like even multidimensionally, if we want to get really like out there and woo, it's like it's all happening at the same time. Maybe we don't really know, right? But anyway, so I think that's why it's important to always bring it back to the now, like the context of this embodiment. And so when somebody, there totally has been those instances where people have a familiarity, a nostalgia that they can't quite say like this, why do I feel this way about this particular lineage or this food? And it very much could be because there was that experience in what could be called a past life. Or it could even be something that is passed down energetically from a family member, like from your mother or your ancestors. Right. And so there's different ways to look at it, but then the question becomes, so why is that coming up for you now? What does that mean for you in this life and in this body? Like, how is it here to support you and exploring that? And so I think that we always want to remember to come back to that and ask ourselves, like, again, it comes back to nourishment. Like, what is the nourishment we need in this time and life and body on all these different levels?
Right. It's focusing on the solution versus becoming somehow fascinated with some old story that isn't even real right now, or it's not the present time and moment, but using that information to benefit us in the now.
Yeah, or like help us, whether it's because I see that a lot of times that'll come in, people will have insights when they have a particular challenge, and it's almost like it's this intelligence that we are connected to inherently, or like when we get those pings, when we get like that intuitive hit about something, it's a message, it's information, and food is information. And so it's all information to help us to get to like whatever the next level is, like where we want to be going. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I see it.
It does. And I could see nourishment as being so many different things, beyond food. It can also be like, what's the style of healing that I resonate the most with? Is it acupuncture? Is it herbs? What kind of herbs? Is it herbs from India or China or Western herbs? Or am I putting on salves or sitting in like Finnish or Swedish saunas or Korean bathhouses? Or do I love flower essences? Or like, like what are these different types of modalities that can nourish us alongside food? And does that resonate with you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's so funny because I dove super deep into nutrition, went back to school, got my master's certification, like started getting nitty gritty with the research. And then I come back to like everything that is non-food, you know, and it's just so, I feel like you get there. And I know a lot of people who they've done the diet thing, they've done the nutrition thing. And then what really makes the difference are these, you know, what would be seen as non-traditional food therapies or aspects of their lives that needed to be addressed.
And you know, it's funny when you say that, it's like food is everything and nothing and everything and nothing. It's like, oh my God, we can make such a big deal out of it. And then, but in the end, it is sort of everything. Like just eating 3 meals a day at the right time every day is so hard for most people, myself included. Like I'll, you know, delay lunch, or I'm working on a project, or then your blood sugar goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we just ate like breakfast at this time every day, lunch at 12 every day, dinner at 5, 6 every day, whatever it is, we'd probably improve our health a lot just by like eating at the regular times and like the simple things that we know work for our bodies. But
Totally.
it's so hard. So it's like everything and nothing and everything at the same time.
I know. And I feel like the world we live in, I mean, that's the whole reason why I started the podcast, because I was like, I want to explore all of these different ways and forms of nourishment in this modern world that makes it so freaking difficult to do, you know, like I really feel that that is part of our growth though. And this evolution is the challenge and resistance that we live through in this modern time to kind of get back to this connection to ourselves and our environment and nourishment.
Why do you think we have such a cultural resistance to nourishment? Or how do you see that manifesting in your clients?
Yeah. Well, the biggest and first place that that my mind goes to right now is disconnection from nature, like disconnection from the fact that we are nature, and disconnection at the level, not even just, you know, sort of like the whole conquering nature type of thing that we have evolved into as a society, and also like the cultivation and agriculture and monocropping. I mean, you know, there's a lot of different ways that this disconnection is happening, like the disconnection from the natural cycles, and how we are directly related to all of that, how the environment and nature informs our health and vice versa. So, you know, I think it's no coincidence that as a society, we are getting extremely sick and the earth is getting extremely sick, right? There is a direct correlation there. And so, but what I'm seeing now is like this coming back, this movement back to nature and exploring what that means, and a remembering of who we are, and also remembering that all of life has like soul, you know, like there's spirit, like the disconnection from spirituality, even with food. If we go back to ancient times, I might be going on a tangent here, but
okay.
If we go back to ancient times, there was no disconnection from food and spirit, you know, but now there is. And when we look at science, there is like no space for spirit. When we look at herbalism, using plant medicine for since the beginning of time, when we've cultivated this relationship with plant medicine, there was an understanding that there was this energetic and spiritual component to it. Well, then we westernize that and take the spirit away. So this de-spiriting process is part of the disconnection from nature, in my view. And what I see now is this return back to that, like this, almost like, because we've been so starved of it, that we are coming, it's like, oh my God, this is so nourishing. Like I'm so starved from this for generations, I need to infuse my body with this again and my being. And that I feel like that's what we're working toward, but it's not an overnight thing, and it's not easy.
And how does that tie into Feed Your Wild?
All of it, everything. It's like, so, because for me, Feed Your Wild really means nourishing the aspects of ourself that are ancient and wise and innate, and we have within us. And it's this connection with that, the fact that we are nature, we can't get out of that. Like, it's like denying who we are.
Right.
And so feeding your wild is remembering who we are. And through this remembrance, nourishing these aspects that have been starved. So whether that, and seen and unseen. And that's why, the work with the Akashics that I do is in this unseen realm, and that spiritual realm, that to me has become just as important as the food that we're putting on our plates and we're putting into our mouths. So I love to think of food. When you look at the etymology of food, I love words. I think words are really powerful. And looking at the words that we're using can inform a lot about our existence. And so food is derived from what they believe, this term from the Greek word patistai, and this meant to pasture and to shepherd. So it's interesting to think about the food that we bring into our bodies is that which will help us to shepherd us to a new state or a new being. We're literally taking in the building blocks of what will eventually become our new cells. So where do we want to shepherd ourselves to? Like, who do we want to become? Where do we want to go? And I think that this process of remembrance, this feeding that wild aspect of us, will help us to do that.
Yeah, it just makes me think, for some reason, I keep thinking of our retreat in Costa Rica that we just had in November. We're doing them every November, and it's almost like it's hard to put words to those kinds of things when you're talking about remembering who you are, because it's like what it feels like when you're in the ocean every day, or the feeling when you're getting sunlight on your skin every day, or when you're getting enough rest, or when you're getting enough oxygen from all the leaves and trees around you, and the ability to kind of move just a little more slowly and take things in. It just reminds me of, how to me that feels like kind of more like the primitive lifestyle that you were talking about, and how then when you come home, you have to sort of, how do I bring that into this daily life?
Mm-hmm.
And and work it into the schedule and the lifestyle that you create for yourself at home. So how do you help people do that when you work with people one-on-one? What kinds of services do you offer when you're working with people one-on-one, and how does that work?
Yeah, so that's why my favorite way of working with people is a longer term program and capacity, because it becomes like a partnership. I'm in it with them, helping them along, because it's not an overnight thing. When what you spoke to, like coming back to quote reality, that's how a lot of people describe it, right? Like, oh, now I'm back to reality and I'm going back to work on Monday, after
or non-reality,
virtual reality. And I think that we have to get really honest with ourselves. We are working in the sense of like walking toward what it is that we want. We're working against a lot of things that hold us back in terms of like what we've created in this society. The increasing expectation of people like overworking, for example, that you only get 1 or 2 weeks worth of vacation in a year, where many other countries, like, that's like, what? Are you kidding? You know,
right.
at least like in America. And so I think that we have to get really honest about ourselves, about where we live, and what this expectations we set upon ourselves. And a lot of times those expectations, they are programmed into us. They're not our own. They're what we are programmed to believe we need to meet, these expectations, right? To be, quote, successful. So a lot of times when I'm working with people, it's kind of bringing a spotlight on those, like the biggest ones that they feel are holding them back, and really taking those apart, like breaking it down. You know, like you don't have to be so busy. You don't have to like do XYZ. What's going to happen? And that's all about coming back to creating space for yourself so you can begin to explore, so you can actually have the time to nourish yourself. I think time is one of the biggest excuses that people have, but the fact is we all have the same amount of time in a day, and we need to be so incredibly vigilant about keeping our time. Like we need to be the keepers of our time. Time is not the keeper of us, and others are not going to dictate our time. Correct. So I think what it really takes and where it starts is planting the seed of shifting that consciousness. Because when you begin to shift that consciousness, holy shit, all these other like opportunities and ways of being open up that did not exist before because you were in a different consciousness. So rather than kind of like help somebody to find a solution, like this is what you need to do, it's really about, okay, how can we help shift that consciousness so that you see the solutions that are already there, but you're not able to see them now because you're in this paradigm where it's like there's scarcity or there's pressure or whatever it is.
Right. It makes me think of, again, I go back to this retreat in Costa Rica where I think when we are more spacious, in my experience, things just seem to kind of fall into place more easily, and we're a lot more supported, and the right things happen at the right time without effort. They used to say, like, in, what is it? Wei Wu Wei. It's like the self-arising action of non-action. And I think that we can get to that point of what you're talking about, where you experience more spaciousness in your daily life and things become more effortless, and the reality that we have is less busy, but more gets done, if that makes sense. Or there's more impact.
Yeah. And I think that it's not a switch that you flip either, right? Like, because I experience everything spiralically, and I see that, that's also a pattern in nature. It's this, oh, okay, I experienced this. Oh my God, this feels amazing. And then you like spiral back around, and it's like you come back to something that feels familiar in terms of a challenge or a block, but you're at a different level with it. And so it doesn't mean that you like flip on some switch and then you're golden forever, but it's about returning back at each level and breaking through, I think, by breaking away from these patterns of programming that we've just received since we were a little tiny fetus in our grandmother's womb, right? We were like an egg in our grandmother's womb when our mother was a fetus.
Right. That's kind of wild. So I know that you said you were going to offer a certain amount of one-on-one consultations. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I'm so excited to offer this because my favorite way is working one-on-one with people. And so I thought, well, what could I offer the LOTUSWEI community? And I wanted to give the opportunity for somebody who is sitting there and is like, all of this is resonating with me, and I want to dive deep, and I kind of want to explore these realms of what might be going on for myself, then I'd love to invite you to a one-on-one session, totally complimentary. I have 3 open spots because, you know, it's I want to honor my spaciousness and my calendar as well.
3 is great. 3 is very generous. It's very sweet.
And so this is first come, first serve. And so I will have, if you do want to connect and you want to have that opportunity, grab that spot with me, one of the 3 sessions, then you can go to wildlyrooted.com/LOTUSWEI. And I will have all of the details on how you can set up our schedule and do that. And once the 3 are gone, they're gone. And I'll make sure to post that once they're not available, but just wanted to give people an opportunity to explore that if they wanted to.
That's really sweet. And then there was another program that you wanted to offer as well, which is incredibly generous, called Wildly Unstuck. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I love that we kind of went into those other realms of what holds us back, because that's really what Wildly Unstuck is all about. It's called Wildly Unstuck, Mastering the Mindset of Health. It's a totally free program, but it's like a full program. It's an audio program with 6 modules and like 3 to 4 hours of audio work, and really uncovering the top 5 things that I see that sabotage your health goals and what to do about them. So we dive deep into some of the aspects that we were talking about today, and it's totally free. So it's digital, it's online. There's like a course portal that you go into, and you can find that at wildlyrooted.com/unstuck.
Cool. That is wonderful. We'll have those links on the podcast blog post if anybody gets lost. Otherwise, to find out more about you in general, you can search her on wildlyrooted.com. She's also on Instagram under the handle name Wildly Rooted. And then just in wrapping up, Venessa, are there any words of wisdom or advice that you just commonly find yourself offering, or anything that kind of springs up from your heart? Is anything else that you want to add?
I feel that a lot of the conversations I've had lately are with people that it's like they already know. They already know what their challenges, what their blocks are, and what they need. And I just want to reiterate for people to cultivate I think one of the most important things we can do is to cultivate that trust in our own guidance. And I know that could be really hard sometimes when you're feeling like, well, I'm craving pizza. I don't think that's good for me, right? But I think that there are these deeper, quieter voices that we have that we don't pay much attention to sometimes, or we glaze over, or we don't get quiet enough in our own lives to really hear. But it's there. It is always there. And I just want to honor that for everybody, and really invite you to carve out some time to have that conversation with yourself, to create that spaciousness, and to honor what comes up for you, and to really just trust that that's where you need to start.
I love it. Thank you so much for being with us. Really loved our conversation.
Oh, I did too. So much fun. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.